Hey, Bitcoin wealth builders. Welcome to episode 79 of Bitcoin Hard Talk. The proof of weapons network is crumbling through a controlled demolition right in front of our eyes as people are protecting themselves with the proof of work. Peaceful proof of work is crowding out violent proof of weapons. And this week, the proof of weapons network started a new front of war. It is getting desperate to prop up the US dollar Ponzi scheme. It is looking for more death and destruction in order to keep the system alive, but there is no stopping this force. President Trump has set the tariffs, and the tariffs will never make America great again, but it will turn it into a regional power as we transition to this multipolar world. So in this episode, we're going to be discussing the multipolar world from three different angles: the impact on Bitcoin, the impact on macro, and the impact on the geopolitical side. We're going to be covering everything that's happened this week, and we're going to be diving deep into those three topics. If you are new to the show, my name is Simon Dixon. I spent the last 25 years dedicated to investing, monetary reform, and then later Bitcoin. 14 years in Bitcoin. And ever since $3, people have managed to peacefully protect themselves and build economic power by demonetizing the fiat debt-based proof of weapons network Ponzi scheme. And it has never been more clear to me that we are going through one of these once in a generation transitions, and everybody needs to protect themselves. So get ready for a world of Bitcoin, AI, and central bank digital currencies, because we're going to be diving into this week in Bitcoin macro and geopolitics through Bitcoin Hard Talk episode 79. Now, as a recap, my long-term followers, you will know that way back on this channel in 2009, I uploaded a video to YouTube called The Great Depression of the 2020s. So this was even from a 2007 talk. This is pre-Bitcoin, where I was predicting that the debt-based Ponzi scheme would hit this inevitable, predictable, and guaranteed leverage point, and we would enter into what I called at the time the Great Depression of the 2020s. In 2019, a decade later, I released a 4-part video series where I shared exactly, and you can still get this from the free Bitcoin Hard Talk membership portal. Just create a membership on simondixon.com. But I shared the 4 videos in order to get people prepared for this moment that is happening right now, so you can be ready for any economic environment. Early next year, I'm going to be doing the 2026 version of the proxy Great Depression of the 2020s. The team has been working on it. But on April the 2nd, 2025, President Trump delivered Liberation Day. And Liberation Day was, in fact, liberation for all of those that have been destroyed, raped, pillaged, and stealed from the dollar and the proof of weapons network and the infiltration that the Federal Reserve, when it transitioned the American economy to be asset stripped for the banks, for the shareholders of the Fed, just as the Bank of England did for England, and just as the European Central Bank has been doing for Europe, as it strips the world of their assets and doesn't invest in this infrastructure, doesn't invest in its people, because the ECB is not European first. The Fed is not America first, and the Bank of England is not Brits and England first. And so we're going to be covering what has happened since Liberation Day. If you did not watch last week's episode, Bitcoin Hard Talk episode 78, where I deconstructed the true meaning behind Scott Bessent's interview, the US Treasury Secretary, where I went through word by word what it means and what they're doing, so that you can do the opposite of what they're telling you to do, because everything they are telling you to do is the opposite of what they're doing with their money. So we're going to discuss it today. I'm going to show you what they're doing with their money so that you can be more prepared for this multipolar world order. So let's start right now with this week in Bitcoin. The financial terrorists, Cantor Fitzgerald, headed up by, or used to be headed up, or the founder, Howard Lutnick, who is the Commerce Secretary of the Trump administration right now, announced that they're going to be raising $3 billion to create, quote, a massive stockpile of Bitcoin. So he wanted to pump the shit into these wild, volatile markets, the stock of Cantor Fitzgerald, which I think went up at about 30%. I haven't been following it. But he wanted to create a pump so that he could announce that he's going to be loading up Cantor Fitzgerald with Bitcoin. Just so you know, Cantor Fitzgerald is a primary dealer for the Federal Reserve. There's only 25 of those. And those primary dealers get to sell and benefit from rolling over the debt-based Ponzi scheme by selling government debt. And Scott Bessent, as he said when he took the office, he is a bond salesperson. At the same time, we got Michael Saylor announced that he's going to be raising enough money to buy approximately, at today's price, another 590,000 more Bitcoin into his company Strategy, which is going to be $84 billion raise, $42 billion equity, and $42 billion corporate debt. Now, who are those corporate debts? Who are those buying those bonds? That is the banks and financial institutions that are rolling and managing your money via institutions like BlackRock. And the reason why, if you look at the largest lenders to the US government, Japan is going down, China is going down. The international scene are lending less to the US government, but Cayman Island is going up. And that's not because Cayman Island is lending a load of money to the US. It's because they are packaging up your pensions to make you the bag holders of the final barrels of the US debt while they try and roll it over and roll it over and roll it over until eventually it cannot be rolled over no more. And the Federal Reserve has its tools. And its tools for the banks are able to pump the market, sell their positions, and redeploy their capital into the multipolar world that we will be covering. And so they are getting everything ready for that. Essentially, Strategy, which I think is working for the investment banks that are raising this finance, and who are the investors that are subscribing to these corporate bonds, they're the same banks and financial institutions that crashed the crypto and Bitcoin market in 2022, that created the artificial bank run in 2023, that crashed the three crypto banks, Signature, Silvergate, and Silicon Valley Bank. And then BlackRock got approved after Operation Choke Point 2.0 in order to launch the Bitcoin ETF. And now the SEC said, we'll give an exemption to Bank of New York Mellon. Who's Bank of New York? Oh, the same Mellon family that banked the Trump administration, the second largest contributor after Elon Musk. Elon Musk, the person that's creating a technocracy, a stateless, non-American first technocracy using artificial intelligence, using driving data, using X, and building that all into essentially combining it with FICO and your social data. Sounds to me like a social credit score, because all they do is lie to you and propagandize you into believing that you don't have the same system that overtly exists within China. Instead, you have it covertly, and you think that you have something differently. Anyway, they are building it up and ratcheting up as they test whether the First Amendment even exists anymore, as they package up people that are protesting in the universities because they don't want their university endowment funds to be investing in the military industrial complex, which is murdering people around the world to prop up the dollar. And because students are protesting against that, they're literally packaging them up with no due process and sending them and selling them into a prison in El Salvador, where they will never see their partners and their loved ones and their children again. Even when judges come along and say that is the wrong person to be putting in El Salvador, and all because the laws are changing, saying you cannot talk against Israel under anti-Semitism law, as they weaponize the trauma that was inflicted upon after World War II or during World War II by the same people, the Europeans that are essentially in Palestine right now, as they use these laws to test whether they can amend the First Amendment right. And they can test whether you will comply. And people are cheering it along, saying, we're making America great again. Well, anyway, now if MicroStrategy, who essentially works for the banks at this point, having raised billions and billions and billions of dollars for corporate bond issuers that are not getting enough returns, and so they need to turn to Bitcoin. They're looking to supplement those pensions via the Cayman Island packages by buying this debt instruments. And these debt instruments, some of them are promising based upon a belief that the price of Bitcoin will go up, which I agree with over time. But as we get closer and closer to the financial terrorists like Howard Lutnick from Cantor Fitzgerald, who is connected directly into the last bit of the debt-based Ponzi scheme for the dollar, they are preparing and engineering exactly what we saw in 2022. And for those of you that were not around, we'll cover more on that as well, because I was around and very involved in some of those bankruptcies. In fact, the proof of weapons network, I had a policy which I violated. I decided to borrow against some of my Bitcoin. And in fact, next Friday, Maszynski will be facing up to 20 years for the work that he did in stealing money. I ended up with approximately $45 million of Bitcoin that I was borrowing against. Fortunately for me, it was risk managed. So, it was okay for me. But other people had 100% of their Bitcoin that they were borrowing against, and they ended up with no Bitcoin and wrecked at the end. I'm going to share the lessons, because all they do is they use financial manipulation by the Federal Reserve. They hike rates and inflation is transitory. They use Operation Choke Point 2.0. They co-opt the regulators in order to engineer the game in their favor. They pay the politicians to exert their strategy, and then they can create a ginormous pump and dump in order to take you and part you from your Bitcoin, all because you entrusted them. The very same banks that are the ones that engineered the system in your favor, that have been stealing all your wealth all along, and you thought, I need the banks in order to buy Bitcoin. Not Bitcoin hard talk, people. We're going to make sure none of that happens. But if Michael Saylor, who essentially now works for the banks because of the amount he's raised from the banks, and I think will be weaponized as a tool in order to get that Bitcoin from you at some stage, watch it. We'll engineer it over the next 2 years, maybe even sooner. But in MicroStrategy may end up, if he gets the Bitcoin at the current price, and maybe he won't, with over 1 million Bitcoin and close to the Satoshi Nakamoto wallets. And so this is, people are cheering it along. It doesn't matter. Fortunately, Bitcoin's proof of work. So if you own your Bitcoin in self-custody and you don't borrow against it and you don't leverage it, you'll be fine. In fact, you'll be the person that's buying Bitcoin on the cheap, just like they will be, as long as you get yourself ahead of the game and you don't fall for their financial weapons of mass destruction. So at the same time, what is the Trump administration doing? Well, firstly, the Department of Justice decided to take this opportunity to dismantle its crypto enforcement unit. Convenient. So Howard Lutnick is setting up his Bitcoin borrow against your Bitcoin leverage system. And all of the other financial traditional markets like Strategy are getting ready to create a big honeypot of Bitcoin. And now the Department of Justice doesn't have a department. So if you wanted to steal everybody's Bitcoin, this is the time to do it while Trump is in charge. And then you create a deregulating environment so that all of this is possible. And now you've got organizations like Galaxy Digital that are announcing that they're going to be going public with their Bitcoin mining company and their Bitcoin investment bank. The same Bitcoin investment bank that will probably be structuring into the public markets SPACs, where you reverse engineer Bitcoin into a public company, and then they allow people to collateralize some of that Bitcoin and use financial weapons of mass destruction to persuade you to borrow against your Bitcoin so that you hold it with them so that they can charge a fee and earn some interest off hard money. If this is not familiar, this is exactly what happened with the banking system. This is how fiat currency was created. They persuaded you to put your gold with them because it's very hard to self-custody gold. And so you put it with the goldsmiths, and then the goldsmiths start issuing more receipts, and they allow you to borrow against your Bitcoin. That receipt for gold becomes as good as gold. And then they would issue more and more receipts, and then eventually you can't even get your gold, and you end up with them stealing your gold in a Chapter 11 bankruptcy, and then marking the gold to market like the US government has done at $42 after they stole it from you, after the Fed created the pump and dump of the roaring 20s, followed by the Great Depression of 33. So Galaxy Digital is going to be listing on NASDAQ. They're applying for that. Charles Schwab, the largest retail brokerage in the world. I think they manage something like $7.1 trillion for retail. They're going to be offering their Bitcoin services. Cantor Fitzgerald, one of those primary dealers in the US Treasuries, he's getting involved in everywhere. They're now being authorized to trade directly into the Federal Reserve, became a shareholder in Tether. You know that I was a shareholder, still am a shareholder in Bitfinex. I invested in over 100 companies in the industry. Tether is a sister company, but they got investigated by the Department of Justice, and now all of a sudden they're working with Cantor Fitzgerald managing those treasuries, and now Cantor Fitzgerald is a shareholder. You know how the proof of weapons network works. They miss Bitcoin, they crash the market, they take over as much of the Bitcoin as they can to try and steal it from you, because they know that Bitcoin has been the highest performing asset class, demonetizing all of their products. It outperformed every hedge fund. It outperformed all of their funds. It outperformed all of their gold, all of their real estate. All of their products were outperformed by Bitcoin. They couldn't beat us, and so they joined us. The good thing is, Satoshi anticipated this already. Proof of work means that you can own your Bitcoin in self-custody, but many people will own it with them and borrow against it and lever up and have to be taught the lesson again, that leverage is where everything goes wrong. That's where you can end up with no Bitcoin, because they manipulate that. That was the tool that the central banks created when they created the debt-based Ponzi scheme. They outsourced the dollar to the private banks. The private banks became the shareholders in the Federal Reserve. They meet every quarter. They tell Jerome Powell, go say this. And we'll send some money over through the banking lobby over to the Trump administration. Trump, you do this. That's exactly what we're seeing right now. You just need to follow their money and not their words, and you'll be ahead of the game. So now FDIC, the same FDIC that insures and decides which bank to take over, the same FDIC that says they insure your bank deposits, but only has 1% of the bank deposits that it says that it's insuring, because it doesn't insure them. It can only insure one bank so that it can take over a bank when it needs to, roll it up into the shareholders of the Federal Reserve, like JP Morgan. And anytime it gets bigger, they socialize the losses. You pay the inflation. They construct weapons of mass destruction. They do their QE. And then they privatize the gains. And you get all of that wealth inequality, which we have seen 20 times since the Federal Reserve was created. But of course, it is trying to stabilize markets. It is trying to maximize employment or unemployment. It is trying to keep inflation under control, while it's engineered in order to support the banks anyway. So now FDIC comes out and says, hey, banks, you don't need our permission. Put Bitcoin on your balance sheet, put crypto on your balance sheet, issue stable coins, no problem. And so now all the banks are getting ready for their strategy. They don't even need to go to the regulators in order to get any permission for that. They can do it. So now what are they going to do? They're all going to be announcing Charles Schwab, don't buy Bitcoin through me. BlackRock, don't buy Bitcoin, own Bitcoin through me. MicroStrategy, don't own Bitcoin. I'm going to give you X number of returns. And I'm even going to give you guaranteed income in dollars as long as the price of Bitcoin goes up. And Cantor Fitzgerald said, don't worry about those banks. We're going to launch our own stable coins. And Elon Musk says, don't worry about those banks. We're going to have our own stable coin. And yes, it's going to be integrated with your social credit score. And Trump says, don't worry, we're making America great again. I'm going to take those stable coins. I'm going to back it by US treasuries. I'm going to get as much of those yield from the government, and I'm going to buy Bitcoin just like Tether does. I am shorting the dollar and buying Bitcoin at the same time as pretending to you that I am negotiating deals to make America great again. You get the picture? And who is Trump paid for? By Elon Musk, the Mellon family, Adelson, all of these non-America first institutions. The same people that paid Jerome Powell's bill pay Trump's bill. You think they're fighting? They're in the same team. And once you know that, you know that. Make sure you watch my video from last week to understand how the proof of weapons network, I deconstructed the whole thing, the layer 3 concept. This is the most important thing. When I do my spaces and I come up and I tell people, months ahead, what I think is going to happen based upon following the money, they all call me a conspiracy theorist. And yet, who has consistently got people ahead of these trends? Look back at the track record throughout this whole YouTube channel. Consistent getting people ahead of the trends. Why? Because they call me a conspiracy theorist when I just say no. It's just motivations. It's just game theory. It's just follow the money. Don't listen to what they say. While they're listening to what they say and they argue with me saying, you're a crazy conspiracy theorist. That can't be true. Then it happens. And then they say, oh yeah, that was obvious. That's exactly what happened with monetary reform. I was telling people about the Ponzi scheme called the banks. And then they were chucking me out of universities when I was talking about this. Then suddenly they come back later saying, yeah, this is obvious that banks create money. And yes, it is. We have to roll over. And as long as we grow the economy by greater than the amount we take on the debt, all good, bro. Don't worry about wealth inequality. Just keep my stocks up. Just keep my stocks up. Keep my real estate up. Don't mess with my real estate. Don't mess with my stocks. I don't care by the fact that the vast majority of Americans are addicted to drugs. Not the vast majority, but record high rates. I don't care that there's mental illness at all-time high. I don't care about the homeless problem. I don't care about the fact that no one can own their real estate and wealth inequality is getting bigger and bigger and bigger. I don't care about Americans. I care about my stock because you bought into the fiat currency debt-based Ponzi scheme, whereas Bitcoin allows you to reverse that trend, peacefully opt out, and reverse the strategy so that you can start to be the person that you were born to be. The person that has the good inside, that is not trying to simp for the Federal Reserve and the bank shareholders while it's asset stripping the American people. And just look at what's happening in Europe. We're going to cover that there as well. So anyway, now the banks can have Bitcoin on their balance sheet. And thanks to the Trump administration, it's not even going to be off balance sheet. It's not going to be a custody relationship. It's going to be stick it on your balance sheet and lever up. Lever up. So now we've got the primary dealers of the Federal Reserve activated. We've got the technocrats and the Trump administration that are all launching their stable coins. We've got the banks that are all going to be launching their stable coins, rinsing as much of that yield as they can. We've got all of these different players that are setting up their Bitcoin mining companies. Now, thankfully, this is just America. Bitcoin's a global play. There's only about 40% of the hash rate in America. They can go lever up and play their debt-based Ponzi scheme games. But in the other parts of the world that don't have debt-based Ponzi schemes, that still have sovereignty, that still reinvest into their people and their infrastructure, they're also mining Bitcoin. They're also using this the way that it was designed without creating a debt-based Ponzi scheme on top of it. And you can opt out. And that's the point. You can opt out. You don't need to play their game. That's the way this was designed. Because of course they are setting up an almighty pump and dump. And this time it's not going to be a dump because they want your Bitcoin, because they know what's happening to the proof of weapons network, because they are the same people that own the politicians, that own all the stocks, their positions in all the stocks, that control the capital flows, that know that they are asset stripping Americans, that know that they are asset stripping Europeans, that know that they are asset stripping Brits. And they know that stable coins is their mechanism for getting the final bag holders in America, your pension, to hold the bag because no one else abroad wants it, because there is a strategy of multipolarity being executed as we speak. And so what else did we get as an announcement? Well, Tether, the one that became more profitable than Citibank by issuing a stable coin and using it to buy Bitcoin with the yield that the government pays, they're going to be doing a partnership with SoftBank. Who's SoftBank? SoftBank the private equity fund, the hedge fund that gains access to the Bank of Japan, the proxy central bank that was set up after World War II in order to rinse money from the Japanese people, in order to accelerate assets and then borrow at 0%, hedge out the currency risk so that you can create derivatives with Goldman Sachs and JP Morgan. And then you can use that in order to pump up the stocks. And then you can pump up the price of stocks so that executives can meet their bonus option schemes. And then they can use that in order to extract more value out of their stocks. And then they can use that in order to borrow at 0% from the Federal Reserve, from the Bank of Japan, so that they can then speculate and at the same time short the stocks when they need to hedge against anything that goes wrong. This is how the system is set up. And you're being told that this is capitalism. No, this is the Federal Reserve, crony capitalist, unfree market. 30% of your GDP is government expenditure. China's at 47%. You're only 17% away. And yet they're the evil communists. And you're the capitalists that believe in everything, the good of the world. So anyway, Tether, SoftBank, access to the Bank of Japan carry trade. And Jack Mallers, a Bitcoin guy who they just plastered in. I'm sorry, Jack. You worked with us on the El Salvador strategy. I appreciate your work up to this date. But either you are swimming with sharks now. You are full blown in the Federal Reserve System. This is like a mafia. You are deep state now. You're no longer a Bitcoiner. You can paste your Bitcoin narrative on top of it, but you have sold your soul. Once you go in those circles, it's like, just when I thought I was out, they pulled me back in. You never leave the deep state mafiosa network. This is as deep state as it gets, because who are you working with? Cantor Fitzgerald, Howard Lutnick. And they're launching a company called 21. And what is 21 doing? 21 is essentially taking money from SoftBank, money from Tether, money from Cantor Fitzgerald, and building a new public company to compete with Strategy that will have access to Cantor Fitzgerald's financial weapons of mass destruction, that will be a Bitcoin native company. And they're going to be doing the tool that they usually do, a SPAC, which is where you reverse the assets into an existing public company. And then you do some financial engineering in order to revalue the company. And then you revalue the company, you put some Bitcoin in. So they're going to be putting, and then you find some kind of business to do. What business do you think they're going to be doing? Probably working with Cantor in order to become a SPAC company that will get as much Bitcoin in this honeypot and network that they're creating to try and trick you out of your Bitcoin so that you put your Bitcoin with them and borrow against it. And then they're going to be partnering with, Cantor Equity Partners, and they're putting 42,000 Bitcoin into it initially, reverse engineering it into a SPAC. And they are now engineering the stablecoin strategies as well at the same time. What's happening with the stablecoin regulation? Well, it says we would like a 2 years head start where we don't compete with DeFi. And of those stablecoins, we want the stablecoin issuer to keep the yield. They're not allowed to pass the yield on. Why do they want that? Because they are using these financial weapons of mass destruction in order to get as many dollars from you so that they can lend it to the government. The government pays them yield and they can buy the Bitcoin. They are shorting the dollar and going long Bitcoin for as many as they want. And they're making it where the yield cannot be passed on. So they won't allow you to receive the yield, and then you take that yield and you buy Bitcoin. We're going to have to construct financial products. The stablecoin issuers, which are all around the Trump administration, all of the banks, all of the technocrats, all of those that pay, they're going to be shorting the dollar while they pretend that they're making America great again. This is exactly what happened to Europe when the ECB was created and the European Union was created. This is a takeover bid by technocracy in order to asset strip while it transitions to a multipolar world. They are creating the honeypot to short the dollar, go long Bitcoin, and then they create the financial weapons of mass destruction to deceive you out of your Bitcoin so that you borrow against your Bitcoin in order to try and get some dollars so they can then do exactly what they did last time, hiked rates, said inflation was transitory, created a series of events that then crashed the Three Arrows Capital hedge fund, that then crashed the Alameda Capital, whatever it was called, Alameda Research Hedge Fund, that was connected to stealing people's Bitcoin in FTX. And those hedge funds were borrowing that money from Celsius, from Voyager, from BlockFi, so that retail and pensioners had the exposure. And then they left a scamming, lying piece of shit, Alex Majinsky, who would then go to YouTube every week and say, this is the safest place for your money. Borrow against your Bitcoin so that you don't need to pay tax, so that you can empty out your pension. I will invest it in stable coins, and this is safer than a bank. And then all of that cascading liquidation sent the price of Bitcoin down to $17,000 from a peak of $69,000. And what did they do? They put the company in bankruptcy on the very date when Bitcoin is at its lowest, because when you go into Chapter 11 bankruptcy, you get to not owe them the Bitcoin, you owe them the dollar value of the Bitcoin. So you crash the price of Bitcoin, send the company bankrupt, put it into Chapter 11, mark the Bitcoin to market at $17,000, and then you take as long as possible. FTX stole $1 billion from client money. The lawyers at Celsius stole about $400 million. You take 2 years playing that game. Meanwhile, the price of Bitcoin recovers. And then you say, right, I'm going to sell the Bitcoin, give you your dollar value back, and then we get to keep all the upside of the Bitcoin. But this time, we can do it through FDIC insured banks. And because the insurance doesn't exist, we can socialize the losses, privatize the game, back the stable coin by the new treasuries that are going to be issued directly in order to back those stable coins, while the Trump administration, while Cantor Fitzgerald, while all of those that get the stable coins get to short the dollar, go long Bitcoin, and benefit from it. That's what you got to avoid yourself. And in fact, next week, next Friday, the Department of Justice, they don't even care about their team players. Majinsky was installed to execute this vision. The other co-founders, they all went back and did business with President Netanyahu and got exile in Israel. But Majinsky, he was the one that is going down because he was the front man that was doing all the lying, that got to have hundreds of millions hidden in trust companies called Koala 1, Koala 2, and Koala 3, where his wife, Chrissy Majinsky, is essentially getting the beneficiary while he goes to prison, and she gets to spend that money. And they siphon out hundreds of millions of dollars through these trust companies and trust structures, while the co-founders go and get exile in Israel and build a new AI startup with the Prime Minister's Office of Israel. So Majinsky is going to be sentenced on the 8th of May, 2025, next Friday. For those of you that are Celsius creditors, I'll run a space and we can share the outcome as well. I believe I funded a documentary that's going to be creating a documentary out of this. They're going to be doing a get-together in New York if you guys are in New York. And the Department of Justice came out and recommended minimum of 20 years for Majinsky. I'm not sure if he's going to be in the same place that they put SBF and P. Diddy. They're sharing the same place, and maybe Majinsky can be put in there as well. But at the same time, Senator Cynthia Lummis, she's coming out and saying that we need to pass the Bitcoin Act. It is the only solution to pay off our $36 trillion of debt. You know what's happening here. The Bitcoin Strategic Reserve is not going to be for America. The Bitcoin Strategic Reserve is not going to be for the states. The Bitcoin Strategic Reserve is going to be for the banks and financial institutions that are asset stripping Americans of their Bitcoin as we speak. Because America is not for the Americans. And the Trump administration is a psyop to trick you out of your Bitcoin. And we'll go through how that happens on the Bitcoin side, then the macro side, and the geopolitical side as well. Why is that not possible? If Bitcoin was used to pay off the $36 trillion of debt, Remember the Federal Reserve System. Banks create dollars every time they issue a loan. Government debt backed by war is the mechanism for issuing those dollars. If you want to pay down the debt, you pay down the dollars. If you pay down the dollars, $37 trillion of money disappears from your economy, which would crash the banks, crash the system, and enter into the Great Depression of the 2020s. Now, I think they're going to do it via proxy, and I'll go through what I think is going to come in the macro section. But can we stop pretending that this Bitcoin strategic reserve is going to pay off the debt? What you can do is you can have a parallel asset. You can steal as much Bitcoin as possible, like you're doing from Bitfinex shareholders right now, like you did from Ross Ulbricht. That's why you gave him a pardon from the Silk Road, because that's your Bitcoin strategic reserve, and you're setting up and engineering the system so that you end up with the Bitcoin, not the treasury. Why? Because the banks own treasury. The banks own the Federal Reserve. It is all a smokescreen and a fake distraction designed at doing exactly what they're doing in Europe today, extracting value, pretending you're fighting for democracy. If you listen to our leaders, at least we know our leaders are corrupt. You know, Keir Starmer waving the Ukrainian flag as he sends $3 billion to be sent to military contractors in America, while people are there's homelessness, there's no one's picking up rubbish from the streets, there's potholes across the streets. UK, I mean, I left in 2015 because it was in decline. It's deteriorating. And of course, they've got $3 billion to send to the military contractors because Keir Starmer works for those same banks and military companies as well, just as Trump does, just as Biden does, just as Obama does, just as they all do. It is one smoke screen. And once you realize that, your job is to boycott the system, de-weaponize their debt, to spend local, and to save in Bitcoin and enter into the reverse of the system so that you build economic power, so that you're protected and you can protect your family because they're protecting themselves by dumping their assets on you and asset stripping you. Because capital, these banks have no emotion, no humanity. They don't care about country. They only care about stealing your money. Because the US dollar is debt and you can't pay off the debt. So why is everybody lying? That's not how it works. Anyway, hopefully you're smarter than that and you can start to see through the smoke screen, and you can get upset with me. You can call me a conspiracy theorist, but come back in a year or two when you see this unfold, and go back if you want through my whole YouTube channel, because I've been publishing the whole journey, and everything that was a conspiracy theory in the beginning tends to be how the hell, thank you for getting me ahead of that trend. And I've been telling everyone to own more Bitcoin this month than the previous month on constantly ever since 2011 when Bitcoin was $3. We're talking multi-billionaires that have built economic power that are able to influence, and I ain't stopping until my voice is gone. And all you got to do is recognize that you were given a gift and stop fueling the fire of the proof of weapons network that is leading to, we are in a changing time, and we got to go through that as well. It seems way more likely to me that the plan is to keep issuing the debt, probably do it via stable coins, allow the Federal Reserve the opportune moment when it wants to do the pump and dump. And the stablecoin issuers are going to be those that are connected to the Trump administration, the Howard Lutnicks, the Elon Musk, the ones that paid for the Trump administration, while they quietly accumulate their own Bitcoin strategic reserves, and effectively short the dollar and go long Bitcoin, follow their money, don't listen to what they're doing. And I will also notice, where are they investing their money? Where are those Trump towers appearing right now? Are they appearing in Qatar? Are they appearing in UAE? Are they appearing in Saudi Arabia? Are they appearing in China? Where's the Trump towers in America? He's asking people, those Qataris, to do foreign direct investment to buy assets from America while he's putting Trump towers up in Qatar. And what does foreign direct investment do? He's saying, we're winning. We're negotiating deals. What does negotiating a deal mean? It means you're doing the reverse IMF. The IMF was set up to invest in companies to kill and asset strip those countries so that they can use financial weapons and mass destruction to subdivert and control those countries. When he's saying invest in us, he's saying own us. Because I'm investing where you are, and we have asset stripped and securitized and financialized the entire economy, the entire political process, and we're asking you to buy us, and we're negotiating a deal for you. Capital outflows happen when foreigners invest because they want a return in investment, which means more money exits the country. You're even selling citizenship for $5 million a pop. You're asking people right before, while Trump is investing abroad, to buy $5 million a pop in order to enter a country that they're taking to civil unrest, that they're not investing in their people, and they're about to set their people up for an almighty rug pull, where their mental illness is going to actually think, Trump, you were my savior. You were my last hope. You were the Messiah, and you've let me down. And they're going to remain Stockholm syndrome to him all along, thinking that their savior has come. And hopefully more people will see this and they can understand, because the Trump administration is asset stripping America, and he's asset stripping America because this is how the system works. This is not about Trump. This is how the fake democracy works. This is why people are so frustrated, because we think that we have a democracy. We think we're involved in the political process, but they set up the game to do this. It's a debt-based Ponzi scheme by the Proof of Weapons Network that prioritizes war over people. This would be one of the most calculated rug pulls that we have seen, and I think we'll see it during the Trump administration. If I'm wrong, I'll let you know, but I hope that I'm getting you ahead. Meanwhile, the countries that actually invest in their people, that don't tax their people, that build sovereign wealth and sovereign reserves, that invest in their own infrastructure, that invest in their own people, that have invest in their own education rather than securitize, financialize, and install central banks that privatize the creation of money, they're buying up all of the assets of these robotics factories and this artificial intelligence and these data centers. They're even buying up, they spent $2 billion to invest in Binance so that they could be, with this capital outflows. There's even Circle, Circle, who's being acquired. Ripple's trying to buy it at the moment. Full disclosure, I sold my shares in Circle, but I still have indirect exposure through some of my companies. And Ripple Labs, I was a shareholder from a long time ago. They're now looking to merge, but where's Circle deciding? They're registering in Abu Dhabi because they need a tax neutral environment, while America tries to screw as much tax by getting you to put your Bitcoin in their structures. You think this is America first? This is working for the Americans. My job is to try and tell you how it really is. Don't shoot the messenger. People get really upset when I share this stuff. But the sooner you know it, you have to build a foundation on truth. And I'm sorry they lied to you again. This is pure deception. I'll admit if I'm wrong, but the money's saying I'm not wrong. And the money always helps me get ahead of the trends, because they're taking their government funds and they're investing it in things that makes their countries more valuable. They're doing it in sovereign wealth rather than doing it for private banks. They're building their reserves. They're the actual ones that are building the Bitcoin strategic reserves. At the sovereign level, they are mining. They're getting ready for this multipolar world. Binance even said, Binance, 260 million clients, was taken down by the Proof of Weapons Network, had to install a US compliance team. CZ had to negotiate 4 years in prison. And then they used the same old tricks to start seizing accounts of those that were, for example, using crypto in order to save their life during the genocide in Palestine. They started seizing those funds as part of it. And they're saying, Binance came out and CZ said, because now he's got protection in Dubai because he's working with, a country that actually is able to, look at how this can be utilized for the people. That sovereign wealth fund, he said that more and more sovereign wealth funds and nations are contacting Binance to set up their Bitcoin strategic reserves. So while America is creating an environment for the politicians to get their Bitcoin strategic reserves, the other countries are actually doing it. They're actually mining Bitcoin. They're actually owning Bitcoin on their balance sheet. They're actually owning Bitcoin strategic reserves because they know that Bitcoin is the mechanism in a multi-currency, multipolar world for opting out and being able to create a settlement layer in an environment where there's not going to be one world reserve currency. There's simply going to be technology used in order to settle trades in a multipolar world where those that have the most Bitcoin, the most resources, the most gold are going to be the ones that set the rules of the world order and exert economic power. And America is no longer that place. And that is telling us from the Bitcoin side. Let's look at it from the macro side. And let's also look at it from the geopolitical side. So now let's get into part 2, this week in macro. I'll tell you what's happening on the macro side. Now, remember, this won't be a surprise for any of you that have been following us all along. Remember what I said. Under Biden, he was backed by the military-industrial complex, so he takes us to World War III. Under Trump, he is more backed by banks, and so banks are investing in a multipolar world. So they can say, Trump, tell everyone we're doing tariffs and all the macro policy that I'll be going through right now. And then we can have a make America great again narrative while we transition to this multipolar world. The good thing is that the global hegemon, the dollar, is a much safer world to me. It is a world where we can actually have, trade, markets, hard money. We can actually have no fake engineered wars. In fact, the 100 covert wars that the dollar exerted for the Federal Reserve since World War II, we can enter into an environment where it's actually just about investing in countries, building countries and people using their own assets, which is why capital outflows are going into the global south, going into the Gulf countries, going into BRICS countries, and we're getting some of the final games. So this week in macro, let's jump straight into part 2. I'm just going to take a little bit of water. While I do that, please hit the like button. Please share. It's vitally important. Hey, we're getting a little bit of momentum, by the way. For a long time, my content was being oppressed. But I've got a theory. Now that YouTube, which is a part of the military-industrial complex to put that algorithm into NSA to give all that data, now that they're on the same team of weakening the dollar, I've noticed my subscribers have started to go up. I've noticed that they started to share. Last week, I got 17,000. Remember, I used to get like 500,000 to 180,000 views. Then I started telling the truth about and warning people, and they took my views right down to about 5,000, and then they shadow banned me to shit. Now, all of a sudden, they're taking my views up to like 17, 20,000 every time. Why? Because they want to weaken the dollar, and AI is controlling these algorithms now, and they're listening to everything that I'm saying. And this is in line with the agenda of going long Bitcoin, shorting the dollar. And so suddenly I get more views, but I still need your help. The subscribers are now going up. For a long time, it was just stuck there. And people were telling me they were subscribing and they get no notification. Now people are telling me it's actually working. So do me a favor. If you are not subscribed to my channel, hit the bell symbol, hit all, and hit the bell so you get a notification. If I get to 100,000, I get to review my account, and then they can say, I see that you are aligned with what we want right now, and therefore they can start sending more traffic and we get more people prepared. Please do that for me. I'm just going to take a bit of water. I just need you to put a comment. Please get the algorithms going, subscribe if you're not subscribed already. And we're going to go through this week in macro and this week in geopolitics. So Liberation Day, April the 2nd, and then a series of policies before that made Americans believe that Trump's coming after the deep state, while he strategically aligned all the things that will weaken the dollar and get the ability to go long Bitcoin and short the dollar, create all of that setup is exactly what's happening as we speak. So Liberation Day comes along. Now, remember, Trump was installed because there was an alternative model to World War III. Military-industrial complex lost. Banks won. Banks redeployed capital to a BRICS-aligned vision of the world where GCC invests the money and reverses the IMF. Trump gets all of his investments along those, all of his lawfare goes away, all of his Epstein stuff goes away. The assassination attempts happen. He gets installed. And then all of a sudden, you get the tariff policy because for 35 years, he's been talking about tariffs. And he has what no one else has, a cult-like following that will buy into whatever he says, even if it makes no sense whatsoever. So I've been going across spaces, telling people the truth, from 25 years study. I mean, it's funny, right? Random people on X want to argue, and I'm not trying to be arrogant. When I don't know a subject, I don't know a subject. But I did my economics masters. I worked in investment banking, in trading, corporate finance, stockbroking. I've been involved in monetary reform my entire adult life. I spent 25 years, day after day after day, obsessing over nothing but understanding the game of money. Involved in Bitcoin conference, wrote the first published book in the world to include Bitcoin, invested in over 100 companies that became the largest multi-billion-dollar unicorns in our industry, created a company that's the longest standing company in Bitcoin. I'm not trying to brag, but I know my subject and consistently get people ahead of trends because I'm following the money rather than the usual shit that they taught me in my economics degrees. And yet when I say something, they want to fight and think that they know more. Now, it's all good. I like pushback. I like people that have arguments. I'm more than happy to admit when I'm wrong. But I know this subject. And I've got a track record. It's the future that judges whether I'm right or wrong. And most people call me a conspiracy theorist at the time, then say, how did you get me ahead of that? And then it was obvious. And I said that anyway. That's happened my whole adult career. Anyway, it's funny how they want to debate it. So I'm telling them what the impact of these tariffs will be. They're telling me, no, it can't be. Stop talking conspiracy theories. Well, let's have a look. I've been warning people all along of what these tariffs would do. And it's doing everything that it said. So suddenly, China, which, by the way, only exports 10% of its 10 to 15% of its exports to America. They've got massive reserves and they can handle it. They don't have a Federal Reserve. They have a state banking system. So the over-leveraging of debt is just narrative. They've got debt. Of course, they've got real estate problems. But they have the ability to sustain itself, and they have a population that is not arguing over left and right politics. They're unified around the vision of being, the next power because China's been investing in their education, investing in their infrastructure. Yes, they have wealth inequality. Yes, they have demographic issues. Yes, they are authoritarian. But that's just a psyop to distract you from what they've actually been doing. Because now China can survive the whole trade. There is no tariff war. There is no trade war. China has already won. This was the execution of the strategy as an alternative to World War III. China is no longer buying American beef. It's buying its beef from Australia. So Australia benefits, China benefits. China is no longer buying American soybeans. It's buying its soybeans from Brazil. Brazil, Russia, India, China, BRICS. So Brazil benefits, China benefits, there's no issue. China is no longer buying its Boeing airplanes. It's essentially buying Airbuses. And sorry, I don't know too much about this, and making comments. So it's making its own. So it is got the industrial base already to build its own, align with other military partners in BRICS like Russia. And what's happening with America? America can't just suddenly rebuild its manufacturing base. It still needs to import these goods. And who pays the tariffs? The importer. So China can just pivot away. There's nothing that it depends. In fact, if it stops importing iPhones, it can push Huawei. If it stops using any of this technology that's so-called dependent, It's already got superior artificial intelligence, superior robotics, 10G instead of 5G. It's already got it's been investing multi-decades in preparation, knowing that this event would happen, building sovereign wealth, building vast gold reserves. I mean, they want you to believe that China only is the 7th largest holder of gold with only 2,500 tons. Are you crazy? Estimates through the different, they don't disclose it for a reason, but the estimates are about 22,500 tons. If you believe that list, Saudi Arabia is not even in the top 10 gold holders. If you believe that Saudi Arabia hasn't built vast gold reserves, then I've got a lovely war to sell you with Iran, and the military industrial complex will love that war, and they'll make you think that it's doing it to make America great again. You got to wake up to this. So the US suddenly gets economic warning signs are emerging. So this week, what did we have? We had a decline in American GDP. Now, I'm not saying China's insulated from this. This will create a global recession, no doubt. But who benefits from that global recession? We'll deconstruct it for those that want to follow the money and engage in reality rather than patriotism and being led to be slaughtered. By believing what you're being told. So GDP declined. Economic output has essentially declined by 0.3%. Now, I don't want to mislead you. There's a reason for that, because people like Apple that knew what was going to happen, they were front running the tariffs and they were loading up billions of semiconductor chips so that they don't have to pay the tariffs. And so they were front running that, which creates a bit more of a deficit, which creates negative growth because they've been getting ready. They've got all the inventory, the small to medium sized businesses. They don't have the inventory and they're paying the tariffs. Apple's not paying the tariffs. Apple's negotiating all the deals because it's got factories everywhere. It will say, okay, I'll take some of our goods that were in China and I'll build it in India. And then India will get a clip and then China will sell it to India anyway. And who's investing in the factories in India? China. Who's investing in the factories in Mexico? China. Just actually follow the money, step into common sense, corner people and understanding what is actually happening here. So, right, we don't know whether that's going to be a recession. It's 0.3% growth. We could get an increase in that for next quarter, but maybe not. So I'm not going to mislead you, but the data is saying that is moving towards negative growth. 2 quarters of negative growth is called a recession. Now, what about payroll growth? Payroll growth, the figures that came out, that's slowing down. So people are getting paid less. Job creation has dropped to 62,000. That's basically indicating a cooling off of the labor market. What else is that? So when you have negative growth and unemployment, what's the third part, the third factor? Well, you need to start looking at wages. Are wages going at the same time? And is consumption increasing? So this is the figure that was fairly good. So people are still taking their credit cards and buying, but who does most of the consuming? The consuming is led by the top 10% of Americans, i.e. the wealthy. So the wealthy is still consuming and everyone else is cutting back. So consumption was falling. Consumer spending decreased by 1.8%, down from 4%. So it's still positive, but it's down from 4%. What about prices? So Trump came out and said prices are down. Yes, oil prices has come down. What about drill, baby, drill? Drill, baby, drill was supporting the oil companies. Negative oil prices sends the small oil producers bankrupt, drives money over to the GCC countries. Work through the logic here. Yes, it gets inflation down, but what have we got with inflation? The GDP price index, it went up to 3.7%, which is up from 2.3% in 2024. So we're now at 3.7% rather than 2.4%. The goal was to get to 2%. More likely, I always predicting that it's going to systemically stay at 3%, and now it's being forecasted to stay at 3.7%. Now, all of this is happening before the impact of the tariffs is actually factored in. You got a 6 months lag to figure out in the data what the actual effect of this will be. So before the full impact of laying off 200,000 people from the government and the full impact of these tariffs where small businesses can't get the goods they need and don't have the margin, this is the data. So this is early signs, and I'm not saying we're there yet, but it is early signs that when you have declining employment, declining growth, and increasing inflation, that is called stagflation. And stagflation is the economic environment of the 1970s, and that is the worst of all worlds. So what is causing this, and what is the real policy? Well, remember, if you're familiar with Bitcoin Hard Talk, you'll know that we'll say America needs a monetary reform. You can't fix a monetary issue, a Federal Reserve debt-based Ponzi scheme, with tax reform. But you can fool people into believing that it will fix it with tax. And so what is the idea? The idea is that you create carnage. And this is what I've been covering in previous episodes. So you say tariffs on, tariffs off, Powell on, Powell off. We're taking on the central bank. We're not taking on the central bank. He's got his job. He doesn't have his job. We're working with India. We're not working with India. Hey, Japan, we'll give you a deal. No, we're not going to give you a deal. This is all about strategically weakening the dollar, having capital outflows, and making it where it's not possible to work with America, because that is the strategy. Because the banks that back Trump have a different vision of the world, a technocracy, which is a stateless world, a banking multipolar order, because World War III wasn't going to be profitable. And Trump is giving as much strategic leverage through Adelson to Israel, because the Middle East is about to enter into a negotiation, and it wants to give strategic power to Israel as it negotiates with the real power, Saudi Arabia and those with sovereign wealth. And at the same time, you economically destroy Israel, Europe, Britain, and America. And you asset strip everything you can, and that's exactly what's happening right now. So this is about creating peak volatility. Peak volatility benefits those that are close to the Trump administration, that have those hedge funds, and it allows the hedge funds connected to the insider trade in a deregulated environment with an SEC change to be able to make a shit ton of money and wipe out the smaller ones that are trying to speculate the market, the small funds, so they can consolidate power amongst the people that own the administration, because America has been securitized and the political process is owned by the lobby group. There is no accident that this volatility is happening. And some people are trying to use 5D gymnastics to say the art of the deal, the art of the deal. He's going to be doing a deal. He's going to be announcing it. I mean, come on. Doing a trade deal with China would take at least 3 years to negotiate. At least. And we're at the stage where China's saying, should we have a meeting? It's all theatrics. See through the theatrics. This has all been predetermined already. The money's already moving. Why do you think gold was at all-time highs? Why do you think these things are happening? And if you think this is a recovery, and then suddenly the Fed's going to do QE, this is not business as usual, my friends. We'll keep watching and we're doing the covering. The QE is not going to happen. If it does, I'll tell you what I believe the strategy to be. But my bet is that the QE is not going to happen, because this is the strategy. And you need to position yourself accordingly. It's essentially a corporate raiders and a hedge fund's dream. That's what Trump tariffs are. Small businesses, Main Street, those that are over leveraged, they become, they get wiped out. They become the breed. Wall Street, private equity, the hedge funds, they're the ones feeding. They're the ones getting the distressed assets. They're the ones that are negotiating deals with the Trump administration. So if you wanted to weaken the dollar and try and pretend that it's a good thing to make America great again, what would you do? Let's go through some of the policies. The first thing you do is you'd say, we're taking on the deep state, because I'm the outsider that is taking on the deep state. And so what do? You shut down USAID. What is USAID? It is a mechanism for propping up the proof of weapons network using covert wars and terrorism. It funds ISIS training camps, Al-Qaeda training camps, to create militias that raid countries so that America can steal assets and hand it over to the large corporations like M23 in Congo. And it props up the petrodollar. And it was the colonial British Empire that made to neo-colonialism through the American Empire to force oil to be priced in dollars. USAID was an essential part of those covert war apparatus. So you're essentially taking down the petrodollar because the petrodollar is now doing deals. Saudi is doing deals with China outside the dollar. It's starting to normalize with Iran and do deals outside of the dollar. It's starting to go through different, it was essentially even sending. You even get an Iran that was exporting oil to India. Russia was sending it to India. India was sending it to Europe, which created the environment that sent Europe into a recession so that America and the deep state and the CIA could destroy the manufacturing base. It also had United Nations, which is essentially an American puppet organization to pretend that America is serving crimes against humanity while it veto votes against anyone fighting against the American system. So if you're an African leader and you're in Congo and you want to say America is funding militia groups and stealing our resources via Rwanda and Uganda, then America gets to veto vote away from it. And they can also use the United Nations in order to prop up, euro dollar, petrodollar as well. So this is strategically weakening the dollar. What about NATO? NATO, you get Zelensky to come in, you create a fight with him, you do some theatrics, you get to say, hey, we're going to negotiate with Putin. While in the meantime, you're negotiating your rare earth deals, and your rare earth deals is negotiating for the minerals you need for Elon Musk's electric vehicle batteries and Apple's iPhones and laptops, and the semiconductor chips you need for Palantir's artificial intelligence warfare and drone technology, and Lavender and surveillance technology, and Elon's social credit score, which is all going to be integrated into these stable coins, so that in case you rebel, you're going to end up like Europe, where they can manufacture civil unrest, use the narratives that they use. These narratives were where USAID was used in order to control the BBC, control the Ukrainian media, control CNN and Fox, dumb down Americans, dumb down Brits, dumb down Europeans, where they think they're fighting for democracy, waving Israeli and Ukrainian flags, being good, useful idiots for the profits of the military-industrial complex at the expense of your own people, while they use that to strategically kill people. That's how the proof of weapons network works. Then what do you do if you really want to weaken the dollar? You say, I'm going to fire the Fed. You take away independence of the... Now, we know that the Fed isn't independent. We know how the structure works. If you watch Bitcoin Hard Talk, the Fed has shareholders. Those shareholders are the banks. And the banks use lobby money in order to control the politicians. So Trump and Jerome Powell both work for the same people. They create a fake fight. That fake fight says, hey, we don't want independence of the Federal Reserve is a bedrock of the dollar. This is going very funky. This feels like it's not the America that we were stable capital investing in. And what if you wanted to give the ultimate gift for crashing the dollar at the exact strategic moment that you wanted to? You would say that we're gonna audit Fort Knox. And if the audit is not in line with the gold there, and it turns out that it's owned by the Fed and it collateralized, then that's the tool you need. You can have inflation is transitory, get the Fed to do it if you want to blame them, or you can blame the Trump administration and say, we'll audit the gold and we can strategically, do that. So this is because they don't work for Americans, they work for the banks. So kill the petrodollar, because now more and more trades are happening between Saudi Arabia and Russia and China in local currencies. The sanctions were the mechanism for drawing all the BRICS, the Gulf countries all together. They all unify because of geopolitical reasons. And then rather than go to World War III, you end up in this game. And so you set a couple of games. We'll be covering that in the geopolitical section. Kill the euro dollar. NATO is just a sales strategy for companies. And so you can try and scrape. You can get the European Central Bank to print $1 trillion, steal 350 billion from Russia, and then use that in order to get into military contractors, get your last bit, and then weaken the relationship or strengthen the euro relative to the dollar. And then you negotiate your rare earth deals and everything that they've been announcing. I'm sorry, don't shoot the messenger. I'm sorry they lied to you. What was the announcement that we had today? The announcement we had today was that Trump would like to sanction anybody that imports oil from Iran, i.e., China. And is America going to sanction China? Well, if they did, remember, only 10 to 15% of exports come from America. This would destroy the over-leveraged American economy. It would lead it to the types of negotiations that we're seeing right now. So Trump comes out and says, we're negotiating with 200 countries. We're going to make MAGA great again. What are they negotiating? They're negotiating deals for the large financial and multinational corporations that are asset stripping America. These deals ain't going to help you. Look at the Panama Canal. He was negotiating for BlackRock, not for you, not for Americans. And that was negotiating against China. And we'll see what happens. But these different types of deals, it's all about asset stripping Americans, just as the EU is asset stripping Europeans right now. He even said they're negotiating with 200 countries, even though there's only 193 countries in the United Nations. So suddenly he's found 7 more countries to negotiate with, and apparently they're all doing those negotiations. But remember, the importer pays the tax. The world reserve currency means you need to export dollars. Exporting dollars means you need to run trade deficits and fiscal deficits in order to create those dollars, which is why the debt's there. And if you want to rebalance that, you need to go into an economic destruction mode and not be the world reserve currency anymore. So if Trump achieves the goal of bringing back the manufacturing base, who's going to do that manufacturing? If you don't want iPhones to cost $10,000, you either put them in India and then you create an arbitrage trade, or you bring them to America and you increase the price tenfold. But what's America going to do? They're going to do it with robotics. That's not going to help Main Street. That's not going to create jobs. That's going to eliminate jobs. That's going to set up the environment with a stablecoin technocracy for a stablecoin standard. It's all being framed as bringing back the manufacturing base. The only manufacturing that will come back is robotics, building AI, data centers, and military weapons for the, that's what all technological innovation in America has essentially been. The military creates it. They hand it over to an entrepreneur like Elon when they want you to have it. But all of the technology was created for military, for killing, for propping up the dollar through this USAID, IMF, proof of weapons network. So now maybe that's not useful anymore because banks have won over military and they want America to no longer to be the world's military. So then you disrupt that model and you build the technocracy within America. And that's exactly what's happening right now. And then you get all the deals in favor for the large corporations are going to be asset stripping. And then they're going to be redeploying that capital abroad and setting a new world order and a new profit structure based upon the multipolar world order that we'll discuss today. If America wanted to rebuild its manufacturing base, firstly, it would have to bring in all of the stuff. And didn't he say anti-immigration? Suddenly that's going to pivot to, we'll do legal immigration from India. Is that what the policy was? Wasn't that what created a lot of problems with the H-1B visa controversy? And at the same time, aren't they deporting people not because they're deporting illegal immigrants, but because they're using their First Amendment right in order to protest against universities sending money for a genocide? And that puts you in Guantanamo Bay and deported to a prison in El Salvador. That's how you create civil unrest. It would take decades to rebuild the manufacturing base. I'm sorry, they're lying to you. It's actually the strategy of the proof of weapons network, because the proof of weapons network controls Europe, controls America. And when we go through the geopolitical section, we'll talk about what the implications are in the Middle East and how that goes as well. US will still be buying from China because it needs to for years to come. China will not be buying from America because it doesn't have to buy. And where it has to buy, the large corporations will get the exemptions, and that's all that's happening. This is just like COVID. It is an attack on Main Street for Wall Street. Now, when that capital goes out of America, it's going to be building up the global south. So this is not economic destruction. The world is not over. You just need to understand the monetary flows. This is massive opportunity for large corporations that are going to be buying all of these distressed export-driven countries like Vietnam and all their assets. But then there's going to be a redeployment of capital when America no longer creates war. And that will be investing in countries like the global south, like Africa, like the countries like Philippines, you know, that have been essentially become military conduits, like Latin America, like those that were raped, pillaged, and stolen from through these covert wars, you know, and various other Asian countries, where the Asian countries, they're going to get significant investment. They're going to be asset stripped and investment as well. So there will be redeployment of capital, and who deploys that? BlackRock, the proof of weapons network, and they'll be constructing those products through JP Morgan and Goldman Sachs because they're not America first institutions. They're global. Everything helps China. Yeah, the global recession will hit it, but everything pours. This makes China stronger, America weaker. And people are literally like commenting on tweets saying, we're taking on China. China is bowing down to Trump. I mean, come on. We got to deal in reality here. Follow the money, not the narratives. China has trade surplus. China has a state banking system. China can replace US consumption with its own consumption. And the Belt and Road Initiative has been building up economies so that they can consume their goods. But rather than destroying them and telling them, you have to follow our economic models and we destroy competition, they've been making partners with countries through the Belt and Road Initiative. So they're going to be fine. But they need you to believe in this narrative that China is going to be affected and America is going to win. This is just execution of a strategy that's already... Trump is not dumb. The Trump administration is not dumb. He's doing the bidding of smarter people that have already moved the capital. And this is the new multipolar world order. Small companies can't afford the tariffs. They'll be wiped out. Large companies will negotiate reliefs and get better deals, and they're global. Wealth will basically transfer to the large corporations, as we said. Government will do corrupt deals. And wash, rinse, repeat. It's a wealth transfer. That's all it is. It's not Main Street's turn. If you listen to them, it's going to be a thing. It is a controlled demolition, and I've seen it before because I saw it with my country that I left, UK, and I've seen it with the European Union, and I'm seeing what they're doing to America as well. The sooner you can realize that it needs a monetary reform, not a tax reform, the better you can prepare yourself accordingly. At the same time as all this happening, in the Bitcoin section, I always said, we've got record high inflows into Bitcoin ETFs for 13 days now. So the banks had all got into Bitcoin, they're into Bitcoin. The Trump administration, they're all into Bitcoin. The central banks are into gold while this is all happening. And then what is Trump's deal? He's strong-arming the country that was sacrificed for America through its foreign occupation with the Bank of Japan. The Bank of Japan is saying, we put up rates which crashed the US stock market as a beta test a few months ago. But we decided not to focus on our people and control inflation. We decided to keep the rates low And then what is Japan doing now? The Japan is saying, we're the only country left that is increasing our purchase of US treasuries. We got over $1 trillion of these buggers. Trump, give us an exemption from these tariffs by selling our treasuries. And then when Japan starts realigning with the Asian countries and the BRICS countries and the GCC countries, Trump can say, I was doing it for you. There, we're trying to make America great again. So all of this is about plausible deniability. And we're saying we won't make any exceptions for Japan. So they can say the market was crashed because of Japan, not because of us. Trump comes out and says any country buying from Iran cannot do business with the US. You know, this is essentially saying, let's set up the game to weaken the dollar, create as much volatility, set up stable coins, go short the dollar, long Bitcoin, and set up an almighty pump and dump throughout the Trump administration while Main Street gets completely wiped out for Wall Street. And then the manufacturing base for the strategic things that our corporations and banks want to be made in America, they'll all be done by robotics. The same robotics that requires rare earth minerals that we're going to try and steal from Ukraine. We might try and do something in Greenland, but probably we're just going to buy them from China anyway, because there won't be any tariffs there. Because this was all theater, and this was all a game based upon an alternative to World War III, because a couple of games were played geopolitically, and those games were lost. And so in part 3, this week in geopolitics, I'm going to help you understand the impact of tariffs and how I got ahead of this and how I was able to warn people on Bitcoin Hard Talk on conspiracy theories. Because all I did was follow the money, understood the game theory, and prepared my audience for that, and tried to warn as many people as possible and give them solutions while they're fighting, saying, you're an agent for Russia, or you're an agent for China, or you're a Hamas terrorist, rather than actually listening and recognizing what's happened here. So if you're enjoying this, we got one more section this week in geopolitics. And in this week in geopolitics, we're going to go through following the money of the Trump tariffs and the geopolitical impact, and why all of a sudden the military industrial complex is setting up a new game between Pakistan and India. And we're not going to follow it, because if you've been watching my content, you are very wise now and you recognize the patterns. You know where the funding comes from these Islamist terrorists. It comes from the Americans, the military industrial complex, and banks that are paying people that have nothing to do with the religion to weaponize the religion, so that they can then play the games of utilizing convenient narratives to inspire hate, so that when they want to do their open border policies from all the wars that they create, they can create civil unrest for you and transition you to a surveillance state, because you don't have a government that cares about you. You have banks that own America. And who do they sell those assets to? They sold them to Saudi Arabia and the GCC. They sold them to China and BRICS. Most of American assets are actually controlled by the same money that was being extracted this whole time. And it wasn't because of the politicians. It's because that's how the system was set up. And all of those politicians were complicit in the deception to make you think that the American dream meant that you take on some more credit card, you go deep in debt, you go fight for a war that for the military industrial complex, you come back mentally ill, you come back homeless, and we'll give you some alcohol and heroin and drugs that the CIA is importing, and we might do some human trafficking so that you get addicted to OnlyFans, so that you no longer have children, while we're building a technocracy and dehumanizing. And we're told that that's conspiracy theories, when you actually can see, if you read the book Operation Gladio, exactly how these operations were set up in the first place to launder money via Vatican Bank, through the intelligence that works for the corporate interest, and the central banks that work in the bank's interests in order to asset strip the countries and create forever wars to prop up their illegal criminal organizations and pretend that governments are in control while they install politicians. So for that reason, in part 3, we're going to be doing This Week in Geopolitics. Do me a favor. If you are watching, I would like you to share this information with as many people as possible. Look, when it's positive, I'll give you the positivity. The positive thing is you can totally protect yourself. But if you bury your head in the sand, it will be a negative world. There can only be peace with truth. You can only have preparation based upon a truthful narrative. If you want positivity, then positivity will wipe you out because Trump will give you all the positivity in the world. Your politicians will give you all the positivity that you're looking for, but you need to be smarter if you want to be prepared because the battle is against them. They're not looking out for you. And so this week in geopolitics, I'll tell you what they're willing to do to you in order to wipe you out in countries where still these forever wars are being done for profit. So like, share, subscribe, help me get up to 100,000 subscribers on YouTube. Then I'll get my blue check, and then more people can see the message. I'm going to take a little bit of water and then we'll go into part 3. Okay, welcome to Bitcoin Hard Talk episode 79, This Week in Geopolitics, part 3. If you haven't watched part 1, you'll understand how the Bitcoin market is leading to a game of shorting the dollar and going long Bitcoin by the administration and the flow of funds from the banks and financial institutions and how they're getting ready for that in a multipolar world. I then went through how tariffs and all the different policies were the execution of the strategic weakening of the dollar and driving people into a world where small businesses and medium businesses get consolidated. The large export countries get consolidated into the same multinational institutions, so they control more of the export games. And then BRICS and GCC and ASEAN, the various other blocks, they go closer in order to create a new growth phase. And then the banks and financial institutions need to infiltrate as much of that so that they can take their export capital that is flowing out through strategically weakening the dollar and creating an environment that's very hard to invest in. And they can invest it in order to gain more strategic control in the new multipolar world that we're going into. So, geopolitically, I hope if you're a long-term listener to Bitcoin Hard Talk, you understand how the game works. You have politicians that represent lobby interest. And right now, the most important ones in the geopolitical chessboard of covert control are both Trump and Netanyahu. Trump is mainly represented by the banks and the technocrats. Netanyahu is mainly a pawn for the military-industrial complex. Now, the military-industrial complex and the banks, they invest in each other. And when they launch these wars, if they go wrong, they short the stock as well, so that whatever happens, they make money. You know, through the hedge funds, by borrowing from the Bank of Japan and doing the Japan carry trade. So they're able to access unlimited money, and they socialize losses and privatize gains every time the risk gets too high through bailouts and bail-ins and various other things. So Netanyahu is essentially the military-industrial complex that weaponizes religions in order to recruit people to think that they're being, well, when they're being sacrificed to engage in ethnic cleansing, they think they're doing it for the survival of the Jewish people, for example. Or they create covert operations like 9/11 in order to radicalize Christians and Americans into believing that they should go to the Middle East, fight the war for the profits of the military-industrial complex. And then they have agents like Osama bin Laden that's funded through USAID and creates groups like ISIS and Al-Qaeda. And then they say, when you do these things, please pretend it's in the name of Islam so that we can spread propaganda about the religion and we can radicalize people and create the fake war on terror. And then we can start recruiting people through our networks like Facebook, so that we can have the people that we can sacrifice and they can fight those wars. And then we have strategic tension between Iran and Israel. We create the whole Jews are fighting for their life narrative. We create the evil terrorist, the caliphate that is trying to expand and implement Sharia law around the world. We create the narrative of Russia's about to expand and take over Europe. We have China's about to reunify with Taiwan, and they're going to colonize the entire world so that they can make trillions and trillions of money from printing money that creates inflation, wipes out your wealth, and it goes back to the military industrial complex so they can asset strip through the proof of weapons network and consolidate power and wealth into the banks and financial institutions that benefit from it. Now, why are we entering into this new world? Well, under Biden, remember I covered this in previous episodes, 2 games were set up. The game was the CIA would escalate through NATO over to Ukraine. They would use BlackRock in order to get all of the land. They would use UK in order to securitize the financial products via the IMF in order to take over the land by agitating Russia, completely wipe out Europe by blowing up Nord Stream pipeline and switching off the cheap gas that the manufacturing base requires, and then push them through World Economic Forum into building renewable energy rather than using their nuclear energy, which was a wasted investment. The money went back into the corporations. And then with the recession, you do an open border policy in order to create civil unrest so that you can transition to a surveillance state, change the laws, and arrest people for protesting, to transition to a central bank digital currency, which is due to launch and beta test in October this year in Europe, while America becomes a technocracy. We see what we can get away with in Europe, and then we do the same in America, but we have to put a little bit of entrepreneurship on it. So we'll do the stablecoin technocracy with a social credit score, and we'll make people think that it's different to Europe. Those people are controlled. Those people, we're the capitalists. Those are the socialists and communists, while the same system is happening anyway, just a different mechanism and a different flavor of it. Well, what happened essentially is they did these games. The games was, we'll create October the 7th. I've covered this in previous episodes. Go through Bitcoin Hard Talk episode 76 if you want to go into the detail. But October the 7th was a type of operation that says, right, Saudi is bringing massive power. I went through this in episode 76, so I won't go through it again. The industry is normalizing. America's losing its economic power because of the dollar at the moment, the leverage. Let's put up a game where we decide, are we going to normalize with the old model of military causing forever wars in the Middle East to get profits, or are we going to enter into a new multipolar power structure? Okay, October the 7th is the mechanism. We'll weaponize our USAID media-controlled networks, pretend there was 40 beheaded babies and mass sexual violence. We'll use that in order to radicalize people to justify it, but it didn't work. And then the resistance meant that the Palestinians were not ethnically cleansed. And so Biden failed in his mission to ethnically cleanse the Palestinians and strengthen Israel to fulfill the Greater Israel project. And then it backfired because everyone started learning how this stuff really worked. And they deployed agents across X spaces to debate us, tell us all these lies, radicalize people into thinking that it's patriotic, like all of the crazy things that, weaponize the evangelical Christians in order to think that genocide's okay because they need to make sure that the Israelis are on the land, even though they're Europeans and they're not the Semitic people from that land. All of the crazy things that we know is weaponized in order to justify that. And then suddenly the Messiah is going to return and be happy that you committed genocide. And he's going to be happy with that and then eliminate everyone else. And, all of these crazy narratives that are complete extreme interpretations of religious scripture. Right. Well, what happened? So these 2 wars happened and they were tests. They were beta tests. Would Russia be weakened? And could we take this to World War III and make a load of profit? And will we be able to ethnically cleanse the Palestinian and continue the forever war model that we installed Israel for in the first place to steal all the oil from the region and create a bunch of vassal states to prop up the petrodollar? Can we continue that model? And so Netanyahu had until the Trump administration to ethnically cleanse. He failed that model. The humanitarian crisis is disgusting. If I'm putting on humanitarian hat, you know, you've been with me through this journey. It's the most horrific experience that I have ever had to go through is watching this in real time. The brutality of what they do to prop up the proof of weapons network can only be described as, and they've been doing it all along, we're just getting to watch it on video now. It can only be described as devilish and demonic. You know, and it's still going on right now. 2 months of weaponizing starvation. And Trump's just signing off on it. All good. So we now know that this is just getting strategic leverage for negotiations, because those were the games. And now Trump came in, he spent, immediately approved a budget, said we're going to have $6 billion of military budget and we'll send $12 billion to Israel, allowed them to rearm and gain as much territory as possible. They started strategically escalating in different regions, humanitarian crisis galore, United Nations veto votes any peace as they have been for decades, and just creating humanitarian crisis after humanitarian crisis in the region, while the GCC essentially are negotiating with America to change the world order, because now the GCC has economic power because their vast reserves are being invested through these very same banks. And the board of Saudi Aramco is the same board member in BlackRock. So the region decided after colonization from the Portuguese, the Brits, the French, the Americans, that war was not going to win until they were more economically powerful. So they normalized and they decided to work with America in order to get access to those dollars, build sovereign wealth through their resources, and wait for the dollar to be strategically weakened, and then use this economic power to actually play the game, the same game, and usher in a new power structure and an alignment with other power structures like BRICS, where China was building the manufacturing base and various other things, and reset the world order so that they don't have to go to World War III and they don't have to be in forever wars. Now, that strategy has worked. And Trump was installed in order to reset the world order into multipolarity. Covered that in terms of what they're doing on the Bitcoin side, short dollar, long Bitcoin in the Bitcoin section, and cover that in part 2 in the macro section. So now all of a sudden, while Trump's saying, we're going to come after the Houthis, you know, he's coming after, he's strong arming everything. We're strong. What is happening in the background? Iran suddenly is now in the 4th week of negotiations with America around a nuclear deal. Remember, the illegal weapons of mass destruction is Israel has them. They stole them and killed JFK and stole them from America. Watch the documentary, go to Rumble, put in Ryan Dawson, NUMEC, NUMEC. Goes through the exact flow of funds, help you understand who controls the US government and all the networks and the connections to the mafia and the mobs and various other things. It goes through exact names, everything, exactly how it happened. So the weapons of mass destruction was always Israel, but based upon that, they were able to create narratives that made about $7 trillion that cost Americans a lot, but made money for the military industrial complex. Now, suddenly, the deal that Trump tore up, the Iran nuclear deal that Obama negotiated, was suddenly, reversed. And now he's going back into that deal because Iran has gained economic power by joining BRICS and being vital to China's oil supply. And now they were able to circumvent some of the economic effect of those sanctions. And then the de-dollarization movement happened, where BRICS it's not that the countries have to get, remember, with countries, you can be an enemy and an ally at the same time in different areas. That's how geopolitics works. But their job is to make sure that they trade in their own currencies, and billions and billions of dollars is now being done without the dollar. That's the point. So then you can enter into a negotiation with the US in order to gain back your sovereignty. And so immediately, Iran is able to engage in nuclear deal talks again. They resume. Now, this is why we saw Iran allow the axis of resistance to be strategically weakened and not redeployed. This is why there was a change in regime in Assad in Syria, because this was all part of the negotiations. And so the region is being negotiated as we speak, ready for a new growth phase. And we saw all of these games. And this is the first time you've seen these things, because the forever wars are ending. And obviously, Israel wants some strategic power. So Israel, you saw news this week around, Jelani, who was previously ISIS. ISIS is a US proxy. Now, he is aligned with Turkey. Remember how the proxies work? They're just militias. It's nothing to do with religion. They're just militias that anyone can rent. Turkey rented them in order to gain some strategic power in Syria. And now Israel and Turkey are in a bit of a battle in order to get strategic negotiations in the new multipolar world order that's being set up. And so US through the Kurds is creating the sanctions deal, which is economically weakening Syria, taking over the oil, taking over the wheat, which is what Syria needs in order to be sovereign. So US is there. Israel's gaining more and more territory. Turkey backed the government. And now Syria, or the Turkey-backed government, comes out and said, we're open to negotiations with Israel. And then Trump is sending as much firepower to Israel, knowing that they are economically decimated because they are a welfare state at this point. Their economy does not work. Like, the bonds are crashing. There's fires happening. Insurance premiums are going up. The migration out of Israel is going in reverse. The government is depleting all of their treasury reserves. Real estate prices are going down. Inflation's becoming a problem because of the constriction. The Houthis, they're not targeting ships. They're only stopping Israel ships getting through. That's creating a hyperinflationary cycle. Those that are economic contributors are leaving. The ones that are in the welfare state are staying. And people know and are protesting that Netanyahu doesn't want to bring back the hostages because he's negotiating not going to prison for crimes against humanity and all the corruption that he's committed. So this is creating real civil unrest, real tension, real problems within the Israeli side, and the economy is just absolutely decimated. And so you have all these games. Now, America's giving because the third largest backer of Trump was Adelson. Adelson wants as much strategic power. Remember the model. The model was America used settler colonialism by weaponizing religion and the jurisdiction in order to create terrorism that would conquer more land and create the civil unrest that would justify the profits for the military-industrial complex and renegotiate real estate deals based upon illegal settlements. And then American construction companies would invest. The Rothschild family were the original investors through those banking networks back in the day. But obviously those companies have been, public and securitized and privatized. So now Saudi, Qatar, and various are able to use the economic game to buy the parts of those companies, get economic influence, and be able to reset the new world order. Now, Israel required America and Europe to be strong. America turned on Europe and sacrificed it through the game that it was playing through NATO and the CIA with the Russian war. And it then escalated the October the 7th operation, and that led to the economic destruction of Israel. The goal was not achieved. And now, because of those negotiations, there is a strategic retreat, a weakening of the dollar, and capital outflows that we covered in the macro section as well. We had an announcement. Iran and Saudi Arabia, the defense minister of Iran and Saudi Arabia, issued a public normalization signal and statement saying they are friends. This was the court. Remember what I said years ago? I said China's plan is to normalize between Iran and Saudi Arabia, expel America so that it doesn't create all these covert wars via Israel, and give a Palestinian state and self-determination by overpowering the United Nations. That was the strategy. So we also saw that the United Nations groups that were installed in Iraq from the Iraq war, that gives America the power and their bases, the illegal bases in Iraq and Syria, that were the training camps funded via USAID in order to create the fake militia groups that pretend to be Muslims, like ISIS and Al-Qaeda, and radicalize people through war so that they join those groups to destabilize the region. Now, the United Nations group that was keeping that power construct is starting to leave and negotiate an exit from the region so that Iraq can now stabilize and America can strategically retreat. Turkey and Israel, they're pushing for basically strategic negotiations in Syria to see which one gets more power. The vassal states like Lebanon and various others that Israel's expanding to, they're being fought and they're determining, but Iran's not fighting back via the axis because Iran has already engaged in the negotiation, the normalization with Saudi Arabia. And the next phase is enrolling right in front of us. Let me get some guesses. My guess is that Netanyahu is being set up for regime change so that America can say, it wasn't us, Israel bribed us, and Netanyahu's a psychopath. He's negotiating, don't send me to war in The Hague. The Genocide Convention has said we committed genocide plausibly. That court case is going to go wrong. I need exile, probably going to get exile in Hungary. That's why Hungary has been doing those strategic negotiations to get more power in the European Union. And basically, the era of unconditional support economically by narrative will still remain, but America can't afford the bill anymore and it's not propping up the petrodollar. So the military industrial complex has lost to the banks. The banks are saying, we don't need Zionism anymore as an ideology to create war. So therefore, we'll dump all the Jewish people that bought into that ideology. Some of them will leave, others will stay, and we'll just return Israel to what it was in the first place. Because Palestine was always a safe place for the Jewish people that wanted to come to Palestine. And it was only when the British and the Zionists and the Rothschilds and the Americans created the environment of using terrorism and militia groups in order to engage in ethnic cleansing and rape, pillage, and steal the territory for oil, as we was covered in World War I from that phase. And so we just return back to what it was before, where those that want to leave, leave. And the GCC can start reverse colonizing. So the IMF is retreating. About 40% of the investments in the region, across the region, are now GCC funding, the Gulf country funding, rather than IMF. IMF still dominates, but it's getting further and further back as these strategic negotiations. And so by economically annihilating Israel, they get to buy the real estate in distress. Trump's negotiating deals where he gets to co-invest. He's putting up Trump Towers. So Trump gets to give more power to the GCC while giving more power to the strategic negotiations with Israel so they can maximize the amount of financialization and real estate deals that they can do in the rebuild because they only care about the money. That's what they care about. Now, the GCC are now going to have more power than they've ever had before. This is decolonization. And Israel, it will probably be called Israel and Palestine initially. They'll call it a two-state solution. Trump will probably have a massive announcement saying, I created world peace in the Middle East while he was just negotiating his own book. But I'll take it. He'll probably be given the Nobel Peace Prize. He'll get to do his narrative, but he'll get a bunch of deals as well. Because economically, they played America at its own game and the credit card is maxed out. And so now Americans are turning on America by the large institutions and banks that are deciding what the next level of investment is. And they're investing in a strategic weakening of the dollar, but they'll leave a bit of power there because they want their AI hub and they want their robotics empire a little bit there as well. And so now you're seeing strategic normalization between Saudi and Iran and an economically crippled Israel. So what are they going to do with an economically crippled Israel? Well, they're going to buy real estate in distress. They're going to reverse the settler colonialism and do reverse buy the real estate. They'll take over the technology that's been built in Israel. They'll buy those companies in distress, because the tariff policy is going to send those small to medium-sized business, and they're not going to get the VC funding. The deal will be you have to take GCC funding through their sovereign wealth. And so they'll be able to gain more and more power through investment. Trump will say, invest in America, foreign direct investment. They'll control parts of the AI and robotics ecosystem, and they'll do the same with China. And they'll sit in the center of the world where they have tax neutral capital markets as they start to do and invest in companies like Binance in order to create stable coins, real world assets, and an environment of a crypto friendly environment. This is an incredibly, economically, it's an incredible strategy. And I think it's working. And I think that's what we're seeing. So the Gulf Cooperation Council, which is the GCC countries led by Saudi Arabia, is likely economically acquiring. And then eventually it will probably be an Arab majority, and Christians, Jews, atheists, and Muslims can all live in peace, because naturally that was the state of being before this unnatural force was created to create the profits of the military and to get the oil resources that were needed at the time. So they're gradually returning Palestine to how it was, but they got to do it in a way that seems acceptable to the the Jews in America and the Zionist Christians in America and the Brits and the Europeans as well. And what do they need to do next? The profits move away from the Middle East slowly, but now they need a new economic playground to replace that. So Europe, you get the ECB to print $1 trillion and you make money there. And then you say, how do we infiltrate BRICS? India. Enter India. So now India, which essentially will be taking goods from China and oil from Russia and building up economic power, will be financialized, and it is the third largest purchaser of military equipment from the military industrial complex. So strategically, you create tension because Pakistan was colonized by the US previously. Imran Khan was sent into prison. Colored revolutions happened. Militia groups were funded through this same network for Western IMF interests. And Pakistan was previously a puppet for US agenda. Now, China started investing in this Belt and Road Initiative in order to control more ports. And IMF was strategically slowly weakened. And Belt and Road Initiative via China has now strategic power. So you have the IMF and the Belt and Road Initiative in Pakistan. And you have the military industrial complex that is redeploying its profits into India. And then the banks get to securitize and financialize India and turn it into the next host nation for their economic hitmen, tools. And so strategically, in BRICS, they can use India in order to have these strategic negotiations and try and destabilize the unity, but use that to negotiate as much deals by weakening countries like Pakistan and then buying them in distress through the realms of their dollar debt, weakening and making them vassal states in this new multipolar world order that's being constructed. The US will retreat further because China will benefit from this game. Peace in the Middle East will slowly be something that we start to see based upon these games, and for the first time as possible, because the US is retreating. Because the conflicts were never natural. They never are natural. Like, once you start to recognize this pattern, you'll be a great geopolitical analyst. It took me a long time, but because I've always been a geo-financial analyst, I just follow the money rather than listening. I hope you're starting to understand these patterns and you get to see what they're happening. All of these wars are engineered. The GCC is now economically powerful, and they get to dictate the terms. So Egypt, which is now getting more GCC funding and less IMF funding, is able to set a plan for Palestine to deploy $53 billion of the GCC's money in rebuilding Palestine. And why is this happening? Because essentially, BRICS unified, Russia was able to sell its oil to China. China became an economic power. Through BRICS, India and China normalized, but they have a tension-based relationship while a strategic relationship because it works for both. India now can be strategically weakened by BlackRock. I'll go through that. But the game was set where the BRICS aligned, the GCC aligned, and Netanyahu lost. It didn't ethnically cleanse the Palestinians. So the US has now lost, and Russia strategically won. Ukraine can't win. And so they're just rinsing a bit more money and making a bit more money out of killing Ukrainians, which is disgusting, but that's how these games work. And just carving up more and more lands and more minerals to America, Russia, and BlackRock. And guess what? America's not going to get any of the deals, as I said. It's all going to be BlackRock because they're just negotiating for the financial institutions, not for the American people. So US did not ethnically cleanse the Palestinians via their proxy Israel, and via the CIA and via their proxy in Ukraine, they did not defeat Russia, but they did strategically weaken Europe. And now Europe is essentially in the recession, and they get to beta test what they want to do in America. Now, remember, there was an announcement. They're not even hiring. Go to Eric Trump's profile. You can see they're strategically invested. Trump is invested in Qatar, UAE, Saudi Arabia, the GCC. What else is there? They're betting on Bitcoin. We covered that in the Bitcoin strategy. They're shorting the dollar through stable coins and the stablecoin strategy I covered. They can use the Fort Knox audit in order to weaken the dollar if they ever want to create the volatility at the treasury level. The Fed can decide when to do inflation is transitory in a stagflation environment if they want to redeploy capital flows. And capital already has these new plans. Chaos is no longer the plan, and World War III is no longer the plan. And so basically financially, a new hub is being set, and that's what we're seeing at the moment. Trump, as I said, the region invested $2 billion in Binance. BRICS, ASEAN, and the Global South are going to be the recipients of all this capital. The large multinational financial institutions are going to acquire as many strategic roles up as possible. And meanwhile, the EU and the US are just being asset stripped, and the infrastructure will get worse and worse and worse. But they'll build these hubs of military industrial complex, big pharma, and banking assets for AI and robotics. But the foreign direct investment will come in from BRICS and GCC, while they vassalize India in order to have a bit of a stronghold so that they can make sure that they can try and securitize and financialize as much as they can. Essentially, China already won the trade war. This is just the execution. What you're seeing right now is simply the execution. Everything is theatrics. Once you know it, you know it. You can't unsee what you can see. And capital is relocating. Alliances are shifting, and the multipolar world order involves blocks, and for the first time, the removal of the US dollar proof of weapons network from the boot of the countries that are being raped, massacred, and killed through covert wars, the 100 covert wars. Read the book Covert Regime Change. Read the book Confessions of an Economic Hitman. Read the book Operation Gladio. You'll see how these things work, and you'll never see the same again. The empire of the dollar is fading. Now, does that mean you have a big crash of the dollar? No, you do it the same way you did with the British pound. You change the host country, you redeploy capital. This one's slightly different because it was very clear that the pound was going to lose all its gold backing. That went over to the Federal Reserve after World War I and World War II. That operation was executed. You had the strategic weakening of Germany and Russia. All of that gold ended up, all the colonial gold, and then you created the neo Bretton Woods 2 system that we covered. Watch Bitcoin Hard Talk episode 78 if you'd like to understand more about Bretton Woods. But you strategically weaken it bit by bit. The pound is still here, but it's a vassal state for extracting value. And so India is the new playground. That's all eyes on India and Pakistan right now. It's essentially being used by the banks and the military industrial complex in order to retain some influence in this multipolar world order. The only strategy where India wins, by the way, is de-escalation. So the longer this goes on for, the more power that India loses to the military industrial complex and the banks. So if this carries on for a long time, India is being colonized by the same forces. It will be asset stripped. It will go into growth. They'll use it for confiscation of wealth from the middle class. They'll take all the gold from the savers, and eventually they'll give it the same destiny through the Central Bank of India, and it will be asset stripped and owned by BRICS eventually for the countries that hold on to their central banks and the countries that use their resources for the people rather than privatizing them, and then has capitalism in order to distribute capital, but based upon sound money and hard money. And in multipolarity, everyone can go onto a Bitcoin standard if they choose as well. But there's a lot of gold in India to extract from the people. And it's a real easy one to turn into civil unrest. And so the longer this goes on for, the more weaker India will be, the more weaker Pakistan will be. The tensions within Pakistan only really benefit either the US or the and by US, it's not the US. It means the private corporations, they're going to rebuild and fund Pakistan in order to, and Kashmir, in order to take advantage of some of those routes. But India, the longer this goes on for, the more infiltration and the more securitization and the more financialization, and the more it will be used as a vassal state for military industrial complex and banks. China, it continues to strengthen. And the weaker Pakistan gets, the more it will be either driven to China as US strategically retreats, and China gets to rebuild that and have more control of those strategic routes. It's essentially a standoff. And so, the Pakistan leadership came out and admitted, we've been doing the bidding for the American empire and the British Empire for 30 years. All of this fake terrorism was funded by you. And we were essentially America's bitch in order to create destabilization and create this fake narratives around propping up the poppy seed fields that the CIA uses in order to get Americans addicted to drugs through the poppy seeds in Afghanistan. And so you have the Afghanistan and Pakistani tension. It was all America using those resources through its covert colonization. And you can strategically weaken India so that they gain more control as well in this new BRICS multipolar world. So basically, that's the multipolar world order that we are seeing right now. Large multinational corporations in America will acquire all the medium-sized business, a transfer of wealth from Main Street to Wall Street. The Asian export-dependent countries, they'll be asset stripped into those banks and financial institutions and large corporations. The countries that have sovereign wealth and their own central bank will be able to build power and become the acquirers by partnering with capital and hopefully remain more sovereign. But the BRICS will be able to invest in, they'll have their own payment networks, their own currencies for more and more trade. GCC will have the same. And they will all choose in an environment where people don't trust their currencies. I think it's a Bitcoin story. I covered the Bitcoin story in part 1. Strategically, they'll be acquiring gold, and that gold will be asset stripped by the countries that allow themselves to have the banks and military industrial complex in their countries. And let's not forget about the $50 billion from India's diaspora that live in the GCC countries. They can use that in order to gain some more economic power as well. And basically, China, that is leading BRICS through their economic strength, and Saudi Arabia, that is leading the GCC, they can tighten their economic partnerships, and the new multipolar world order is being set. and Trump is there to deliver it for you. It's a losing game for India the longer it goes on for. And Trump is now effectively 100% aligned, not with America, not with MAGA, but the BRICS aligned banking side. And the military industrial complex is getting ready to dump Netanyahu because the GCC has more power and they're not going into World War III. And so they can now use India as the vassal state in order to enter into this multipolar world order. And tariffs were the mechanism for making it happen. Trump was the messenger. Make America great again was the narrative to make it acceptable to the American people. And the deals that are all being done, the real goal is to asset strip all of the assets from America, just like is happening to Europe right now at the expense of the Europeans, at the expense of the British people, and at the expense of the Americans, while everything is moving exactly as I predicted, and they called conspiracy theories from people that were listening to Bitcoin Hard Talk throughout this whole thing. Never, ever listen to what the media says that is controlled by Operation Mockingbird and the intelligence agencies. Never listen to what the politicians say that are controlled by big pharma, big banks, big tech, and military. The story is always what they're doing with their money and what money flows and capital. It is not being destroyed. It is simply being redeployed. So you need to follow the money rather than being caught in a narrative. Trump, he's positioned to profit from all of this. Elon, profit from all of this. Lutnick, profit from all of this. Bessent, profit from all of this. Marco Rubio, profit from all of this. Steve Witkoff, profit from all of this. That's why billionaires are politicians, because they want to become multi-billionaires and you have to pay it because it's going to come from you. The growth won't be there. It's going to come from you. And that's what they're doing. I'm sorry they lied to you. And don't see this as just an attack on Trump. It's systemically how the system works. And the sooner you recognize it, the sooner you realize that your job is to gain economic power by accumulating as much Bitcoin as possible. And if you look where Trump is investing, he's investing in Saudi, he's investing in UAE, he's investing in Turkey, he's investing in China. He's got a $2 billion fund with Harry Kushner that is fully funded by Saudi. And Trump towers are popping up all over China funded by the largest bank in China, ICBC. Chinese trademarks, since he's been in the Trump administration, are popping up all around during his presidency. And now he's investing across all of the different parts of the Bitcoin ecosystem. He's launching his own stable coin to go short the dollar to get the money to buy the Bitcoin, just like Tether. And he is preparing to profit off Americans with his crony capitalist partners, pretending that as America goes deeper and deeper into a universal basic income, that his stable coin is the one that has the patriotism. But he will be using it in order to get as much Bitcoin as possible. And when they want to strategically crash it, when they want the dollar to be weaponized in order to change and reset the order to the exact mix, they'll pretend that Jerome Powell is looking after inflation. And all you need to do is prepare. The world is not ending. The world is only ending if you're listening to the narrative in your patriotic version of the world. The world is being restructured. There's no stopping it. Follow the money and protect yourself by becoming self-sovereign. And self-sovereign comes from us using the experiment of Bitcoin and decentralized money to build as much economic power because that is exactly what others are doing. And you need to play them at your own game. We need to learn from what happened with the BRICS and the GCC. The GCC reversed colonization, reversed the IMF effect because they beat them at their own game. And that was the only way they were able to be free. So what can we learn from that? Your job is to use fiat currency to get as much Bitcoin as possible for as long as possible, and recognize that the world is changing, because that's where economic freedom and sovereignty lives. Don't listen to politicians. Don't get patriotic towards the flag. So always remember, you are alive at one of the most interesting times in financial history. Some are going to get hurt. Others are going to get wrecked. Those that build Bitcoin economic power are going to be the ones that are on the right side, and you're going to be able to help your family. I believe that you'll be able to do it with peace, love, and unity, and you'll be able to avoid the universal basic income, economic dependency, as we usher in this world of Bitcoin, AI, and central bank digital currencies. We're going to do it with peace, love, and unity. Others, unfortunately, will be on the wrong side of the psyop, and they may end up in violence. And that's what we need to do. We need to recognize that we're in a battle between decentralization and centralization, and Bitcoin has proved the decentralized model, and we need to do that with more and more and more. We'll share the whole journey together. And don't forget, if you would like to see some of those old videos, make sure you join the Bitcoin Hard Talk membership portal for free. Later next year, I'm going to be doing the latest proxy Great Depression of the 2020s video series as a follow-up from my 2009 one and my 2019 one. And you'll be the first to get notified about that if you are a free member of the Bitcoin Hard Talk membership portal. That's everything we're going to cover for Bitcoin Hard Talk episode 79 on the new Multipolar World Order, MWO. Remember, if you start to see other people cover MWO, ask them to credit it to me, because many people are sharing this content, and I personally prefer it if you share my content and credit me, but actually getting the message out there is enough as well. They'll repackage the information, but remember who got you ahead of the curve. Remember who they were calling conspiracy theorists, and remember when they say, yeah, that was obvious, Simon, remember who got you ahead of the curve. So please help me. Please like, share, subscribe. Please join the Bitcoin Hard Talk free membership portal, and I'll keep giving as long as I got, for as long as I can talk, because I want as many people to do this in the peaceful transition. So join me on simondixon.com, hit that yellow button, and you can get your free membership, and I'll notify you every time information comes live, and I'll see you next week for Bitcoin Hard Talk episode 80. Peace.